So today we're talking about entitlement, and it's always an interesting subject to come through. I've got this slide here of two very spoiled pups. I did some dog sitting this week for my niece. These dogs spend their life in Iowa City. She's an emergency room nurse there, and those are her comfort dogs. And the one standing on my couch, his name is Zepp. Those of you who are classic rock people know Led Zeppelin, and they had a song on their fourth album called Black Dog. And so that's Zepp, and he's a Rottweiler. And the other one is Motley, named after Motley Crue. But I just call him Muttley because his mother was a husky who had an affair with a German Shepherd. So therefore he's Muttley. But anyway, those dogs, they got it pretty good. They're pretty spoiled. She calls those her babies. She kisses those dogs. But she likes them a lot, and they get fairly spoiled. I played with them some this week and had a good time with them, and they're kind of just fun critters to have around, but I'm really glad I don't own them. But anyway, they're spoiled. Then as I was thinking about that, I realized, I'm spoiled too. I was born to a farmer in northwest Iowa. I've been educated by some of the best educators in the world. I've been able to live in 4 states. I'm married with 5 kids. I've got 4 grandkids and the potential for many more. It's really a comfortable life as I think about it. And then one night this week I had a little insomnia, and I got up and started watching Yellowstone reruns. And this character on Yellowstone always gets to me. His name is Rip, and he is a good man who's committed a lot of crime. His character in there is a runaway and who went to work on this ranch and eventually became the foreman. And he's the kind of guy you don't want to tangle with, ever. But one of his statements is that he makes a couple of times throughout the series. He stands outside of his bunkhouse and he looks at the mountains and he says, I don't deserve any of this. Not a bit. And I thought, that's some pretty good theology for Paramount to come up with. So he says, I don't deserve any of it. And as long as the rest of them would remember that, they got along fine too, that he realized it's all a gift that he has. And as he stands there looking out at the mountains in Montana, he says, and that isn't so bad. He likes it. He was, as I said, taken in, and that's his advice. Remember, you never deserve it. It's kind of like those dogs I was taking care of this week. And, I think that too, that I was born blessed. And I know that God will provide for me and that he loves me. So how can I respond best to this? All of us here, those of us who were born in the United States, really we won the lottery just by being born here. We've really got it made. We've got privileges that other places don't have. It's really the best place to live. And then we can go look at Lake Michigan around here. One guy said to me this week, we done got it good. But we really do, when you think about it. And if we remember that we don't deserve any of it, it just becomes more valuable. But we don't. We don't deserve our next breath, and we don't deserve our last breath. It's all a gift of God. God was not obligated to give us this life, but he chose to do so. So the question is then, what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with this life that he's given us? There's a real interesting story that I think applies to this in the Gospel of John, chapter 6. And the context is Jesus has just been healing people of diseases. He healed physical diseases. He healed mental illness. He had been healing all kinds of people. So a huge crowd was following him around. Especially of sick people. They wanted to get better. And not everyone did. Not everyone was able to experience that. But whenever Jesus did a miracle, he didn't just do it for the miracle's sake. It was always a teaching prop. So whenever you read the miracles in the Gospel of John, there's a surface meaning and a deeper meaning. And you got to look for that. Every miracle has a deeper meaning. And the one that we look at today is no exception to that. So let's look for the deeper meaning. And like I said, this is from John chapter 6. After this, Jesus crossed over to the far side of the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Sea of Tiberias. A huge crowd kept following him wherever he went, because they saw his miraculous signs as he healed the sick. Then Jesus climbed a hill and sat down with his disciples around him. It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration. See, and again, these healings were always a sign of who he was, that he's the creator and sustainer of life. And so, he was teaching people that health is a gift from him too. And the fact that this was taking place near the Passover celebration, that means it was this time of year. See, the reason that Easter's a different time every year is because it follows the Passover, this Jewish celebration. And that Passover has to happen after the spring equinox, so after March 21, the first Sunday of a full moon is when we have Easter. So that was last Sunday. So that's just how Easter coincides with Passover. It really has nothing to do with this passage. I just thought you'd want to know that. So the passage goes on like this. Jesus soon saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for him. Turning to Philip, he asked, "Where can we buy bread to feed all these people?" He was testing Philip, for he already knew what he was going to do. So, how are you going to feed 5,000 people? That's quite a trick. Can you imagine that? I've cooked for 50 people. That's not such a big deal. But 5,000? And how are you going to provide for them? Now, Jesus already had a plan. He's the creator of the universe. But he was testing Philip to see if Philip had developed this trust yet. And Philip's kind of a pragmatist. He didn't really want to do that. So the story goes on like this. Philip replied, "Even if we worked for months, we wouldn't have enough money to feed them." Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "There's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good is that with this huge crowd?" A couple of things to note about this. Barley was the cheap grain. So if you were eating barley bread, it was cheap bread. It was bread that anybody could afford. So this kid had 5, probably looked like dinner roll size pieces of bread for us, for the crowd. And it was the cheap stuff. And then it says he had 2 fishes. And those fish were likely pickled sardines, because that's what they transported. They'd wrap them up in some leather and carry them around. They liked their sardines. Now, in my cupboard at home, as I was putting this together, I said, I think I've got some sardines in there yet. So I went and, there were 2 cans of sardines. I thought, I'm just not going to look at the expiration date on this. I'm just going to try it. I popped it open and it smelled like dirty socks. But I thought, I'm going to try it anyway. So there were 3 sardines in the can, and I ate one. And then the dogs got the other 2 because they just weren't all that good. But Andrew was, the realist here, and he said, "No, I can't do that." Now, I had a teacher who was from the Netherlands, and every Sunday morning before he went to church, he ate pickled herring. He said that if the sermon was particularly dull and you burp from eating pickled herring, you'll stay awake the rest of the time. So just, think about that as you go through this passage. So Jesus goes on, says this, "Tell everyone to sit down," Jesus said. So they all sat down on the grassy slopes. The men alone numbered about 5,000. So 5,000 guys, and you had the girlfriends and the wives and the kids on top of that. Yeah, it's probably 10,000 people. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks to God, and distributed them to the people. Afterward, he did the same with the fish, and they all ate as much as they wanted. Now, folks, one interpretation of this is that it was an outright miracle, that Jesus used his miraculous powers as creator of the universe and multiplied these loaves and these fishes. And everybody got enough to eat, as much as they wanted. That's one interpretation. That was a supernatural event completely. Now there's another interpretation. There's a New Testament scholar by the name of William Barclay, probably the top New Testament guy of the 20th century. He died in the 60s, I believe. Brilliant guy from Scotland, and he said there's another possibility here. Because in Roman days, of course, you didn't have refrigeration. The Roman soldiers were all over the place. They had occupied the countryside there. And people carried satchels with them all the time, especially when they went on hikes. And this happened in Bethsaida, which was 9 miles from Jerusalem. So these people were walking, look at that, there's a beverage right there. Well, you had a little more than 9 miles to go this morning, but people who go on a 9-mile hike, they probably pack some water and some food. And what Barclay said is that when Jesus took the loaves from the little boy and broke them, everybody decided to take their food out of their satchels and share it and pass it around. And he said it could be the real miracle was that people shared their food. Now, we don't know exactly what happened there, but maybe that was the miracle. Either way, something really cool happened there. And Jesus was able to teach people that all food comes from him. He was demonstrating that he'll take care of them. He was also showing them how we are to take care of each other. If this whole food sharing thing was part of it, that would be one of the points he was trying to make. So the passage goes on and says this: after everyone was full, Jesus told his disciples, now gather the leftovers so that nothing is wasted. So they picked up the pieces and filled the 12 baskets with scraps left by the people who had eaten from the 5 barley loaves. Interesting. Everyone was full. Leftovers typically went to the servants and to the poor. There's never any waste ever on that sort of thing. So as the narrative goes on, when the people saw him do this miraculous sign, they exclaimed, surely he is the prophet we've been expecting. When Jesus saw that they were ready to force him to be their king, he slipped away into the hills by himself. See, what the Jewish people of that day were praying for every day was that God would raise them up a king, a descendant of the old King David, who would help them overthrow the Romans and set up the kingdom of Israel again. Now that was not a very practical idea, because that would be like Muskegon going up against the United States Army. It'd just be a big mistake, because there's so many numbers and so much more advanced weapons and things like that. So there's no way that Judea was going to overthrow Rome ever. But that's what they were praying for, and they thought Jesus was going to do that. He didn't want to do that. That's the ironic thing here. He didn't want to be king. They were expecting a king, and when he saw that they were going to make him king, he didn't want anything to do with it. He doesn't want to be king. I think maybe he knew the old Who song, where the new boss is the same as the old boss. But he didn't want to be king. He wants to be a servant. He wants to be exactly who he is, which is the giver of life and the sustainer of life. So we skip a few verses down this chapter, and Jesus says this. Jesus replied, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry again, Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. See, he is the creator of life and the sustainer of life. The first chapter of the Gospel of John talks about the Word being with God, and the Word was God. It uses the word logos, or logos if you went to college in Oklahoma. And it is really interesting. Logos is a Greek philosophical term also that talks about the power of life, that which generates life. So if you are into evolution and all that, that power that makes life happen is Jesus. And he claims that. He's the creator and sustainer of life. And that's just kind of a cool thought to think of. And what happens is that when we work with him, we're going to have enough. And when we work with him, people who don't have enough will get enough. As what happened with the feeding of the 5,000. So here's what I want you to take home today. 3 thoughts. One is that Jesus is the bread of life. He is life. He gives you life. And he will extend that life beyond the grave if you want him to. He does not want to be king. He wants to be a servant. He does not want, well, as the next point says, he does not want to micromanage you. He wants to give you a vision, and then you figure out how to make it happen. You know, he disappeared when they wanted to make him king. And he's available now to give you incredible blessings. And he watches what you do with them. So then you can ask yourself, well, what good have you done in return for these blessings? What good can you do in the future? So let's remember that. He doesn't want to micromanage you. He wants you to creatively use the gifts he's given you. And then the third one, he wants you to carry out his work. He wants you and me to feed the hungry and help the sick and give people a break who need it. And that's what he's teaching us to do with this. You know, grace is an interesting concept throughout the New Testament. And basically it means getting what we don't deserve. That means that everything in this life is grace, from the beginning to the end. I was thinking about that this morning. I was having trouble getting out of bed because I'm not a morning person. And I was thinking about this, what I was talking about today. And I thought, you know, I should realize that God didn't owe me this bed. And he didn't owe me this person sleeping next to me. These are all gifts of grace. Well, then Diane got up and one of the dogs came in bed with me, and she didn't really appreciate that. But, you know, even the ability to take care of dogs is a gift. Everything is. My first thought was, oh, I've got 2 services to do today. I've got a membership class. Then I have to go to the airport. Then I have to post videos. And then I thought, what a high privilege I have to be able to do that stuff. You know, and realize that it's all a gift. It's a gift to be able to run the Boston Marathon. It's a gift to do all of these things. Everything that we have and everything that we do is not because God owes us, but because he chooses to bless us. And when we have that perspective, well, life just gets to be a whole lot more fun. And I would encourage you to develop that perspective. Grace is getting what we don't deserve. And we don't deserve anything. We don't deserve any of the blessings that we have. But God chooses to give those to us before we can do anything to earn them. So the question is, how are we going to respond? Would you pray with me, please? Lord, sometimes we act like spoiled little brats who think we've got everything coming to us. But as we look through this portion of the gospel and other places, we realize that we don't. We realize that all of life is a great gift from you, and that our thanks is paltry for what you've given us. So my prayer is that you'll keep that in the forefront of our minds so that we can move forward knowing that you have really blessed us. Amen. All right, I'm going to say goodbye to the video audience. As always, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.